Hi, I'm Kelsey Zeiser. I'm a senior editor at Light Reading, and we're here at the final day of the Network X event in Paris. I'm joined again by the lovely Teresa Krasova. Good to see you.
Hi, great to be here again.
So, you've been following some of the sustainability topics that have been coming up at the discussions this week, and you wrote an article about the deputy CEO of Europe for Orange, some of her points on sustainability. Can you give us a little highlight of what she talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for Orange, as well as a lot of other operators, the focus is kind of when it comes to sustainability on decommissioning some of the old networks. Because when you look at, for example, when it comes to fixed lines, when you look at the copper network, it's kind of, I think she said, 5 times more energy intensive than fiber. So basically, the faster they can kind of switch, the better for energy use. And also, similarly with 5G, basically, I think the data that she shared, it kind of seems that it's 3 to 5 times more energy efficient than 4G.
Mhm.
Even then, quite interestingly, there was another presentation this morning from ARCEP, which is the French regulator, and they also looked into 5G and sustainability and energy use. And it kind of, from their data, I think a really interesting statistic was that while 5G is more energy efficient in cities, it's actually it's a little bit more tricky when it comes to rural areas, because there basically, I think it's because there is kind of less usage, there's less demand. It can take around, I think, 10 years to offset the emissions that kind of are associated to the infrastructure that's in place to provide the service.
Okay, interesting. And there was also an ESG panel this morning, and the CEO of Chorus for New Zealand, which I believe is a wholesale fiber provider, was talking about also the importance of decommissioning those copper lines for energy savings as well. Were there any other highlights from that panel that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I think one thing that was actually really interesting is that, for example, with Chorus, um, I think what they talked about was that basically the network is designed for peak usage.
Mhm.
So it's kind of optimized to always kind of serve the demand that only comes in for around, I think, like 2.5 hours or so in the evening. And then for the rest of the day, they're kind of, I think, looking at ways to um, be able to reduce energy usage when there is less demand. And that was, I think, kind of, yes, I think there was a similar point was made by Totem, which is a French tower or European tower co, who also talked about kind of reducing energy or increasing energy efficiency to kind of better respond to the actual demand.
Yeah, makes sense. And I also attended a panel this morning about the journey from for telcos from telco to techco. James Crawshaw with Omdia he was the moderator for that panel. They made some really interesting points. Madalena from Liberty Global, she's a managing director there, was talking about how 5G SA is going to be important to make that shift. And there was also a lot of discussion about the hyperscalers and how telcos have moved from competition to more of the co-opetition and collaboration with hyperscalers and kind of mimicking some of the speeds with which they implement new technologies. There was also kind of a funny point by it was Colin Bannon, the CTO of BT Business. He talked about how he said that the hyperscalers are kind of like the world's worst nightclub, and that in terms of data, it's free to enter, but you have to pay to exit. So, and that's kind of come up this week as well. Ian Morris mentioned in an earlier video how telcos are still a bit hesitant to move fully into the public cloud, and they're still focusing on their own private clouds. DT is developing its own public cloud. So that was interesting that came up again today, and I thought that nightclub comment was pretty funny. So there is still a little bit of that competition with hyperscalers. Was there anything else from this morning or this week that stood out to you? Any topics?
Um, yeah, I think there was one thing that stood out to me was there was quite an interesting talk yesterday about Eliza, which is a Finnish, I think, network operator who talked about how they are using batteries that are located at RAN sites. And they are using them to kind of optimize their energy costs by charging them when there is maybe more electricity from renewable resources in the network, and so power is cheaper to buy. And then they can obviously use that when you have less resources and it's more expensive to use power from the grid. But at the same time, they can also use those same batteries, which already have to be there, by the way, to provide kind of backup. They can use those same batteries to also provide flexibility to the grid, because obviously with how now you have more renewables in the network, and that means that sometimes when the sun isn't shining and when there isn't a lot of wind, there's less electricity, and it's kind of it helps the grid basically to have those extra resources that can provide some flexibility to the grid when it's needed. So I thought that was actually really interesting.
Yeah, nice to have that backup. Yeah, we've really covered a lot of topics this week at the event, from cloud, working with hyperscalers, 5GSA's come up quite a bit. So and of course, sustainability. It's been a really interesting week. So thanks for joining me again, and thanks for following our coverage of Network X.